baby.
Are we on?
Is this thing on? Is this thing? Are we live? Are we broadcasting live?
Hey, I just noticed that you're getting a little shaggy around the, you got kind of like a Viking beard mustache thing going on.
Okay. You're right. And I actually was noticing it too. I was like, it's getting a little scruffy, isn't it? It's getting a little bit.
Is this for a part?
No, this is just, no, Steve, I'm not always playing a role, Steve. Sometimes I'm just being me, Steve. You know what I mean? Sometimes I just want to be me. It's interesting. I don't love to shave, but lately too, I've been not that into getting a really scruffy beard, but I've been letting it grow and stuff, and it's a little out of control. But there's a stage where it gets a little bit out of control, and then it hits a thing where it's not so out of control.
You get the Darwin, you get the Victorian gentleman scientist.
Although I think the interesting thing, I don't know what the science behind it is, but as it's gotten gray, it's gotten scragglier. The hair has gotten kind of wirier because I guess the pigment goes out of it, and it like just kind of shrivels up and. You know what I mean?
You're really painting a great picture here of
aging, of the joy of aging. Here's an interesting thing I am very interested in and wonder if we should do. I think the whole sort of, I call it the politics of facial hair is very interesting. Why facial hair has been a thing?
Yes.
Like, why are there periods of time when people have facial hair? Why are there periods of time when people are clean shaven? Why are there cultures where a beard or not a beard? Why do so many politicians never...
You know there's a historian of this.
Yeah, but so many politicians don't have a beard. So that's why it's weird Ted Cruz grows a beard. And you're like, so many American politicians.
That's interesting.
No beard. Like, what does it mean if you had a beard? Are you like, why? And I remember once having a whole thing with a friend of mine about, and my son about this too. But in the Civil War, the whole interesting thing with facial hair in the Civil War,
my God.
and that so many of the kind of crappy generals and the losing side had crazy facial hair.
Did
whereas
Sherman
a lot of the
have
guys,
crazy hair?
No, Sherman and Grant, they just had like standard beards. They had very kind of like standard beards. Whereas the other guys had these curly fucking like weird things. And like, and it was like guys in the Confederate side had curly, crazy hair. And then some of the bad, like Burnside on were crappy generals. And I was like, there's something about the sort of the emerging like modern soldier
hair
here
right.
who's like, fuck this facial hair shit. I don't have the time to waste on goofy facial hair. So I always thought there's some sort of, but I do think it's interesting. And I always thought like, why the Victorians have such crazy facial hair and stuff. And then I was like, I guess for those guys, Darwin even, and all those guys, the males' fashions were so boring. You just wore black all the time.
That's
you
true.
Just wore the same. I guess a sense of the one place you could sort of express yourself was your facial hair, I guess.
There's some interesting evolutionary questions here too. I don't know what the final word on this is. Maybe it's up for debate, but some people are like, oh, the facial hair is like a way of demonstrating your levels of testosterone and so your virility. I've heard this kind of shit. I have no idea if that's true.
So you're sort of unconsciously communicating that I'm very virile. I can sire a brood because of my, look at me. I
I look like a fucking eunuch here. Like I should be singing for a castrati choir.
Oh, Steve, not true. I actually think your beard is very attractive and subtle, and it's neat, and it looks good. I look like Ted Kaczynski, except I don't have that much hair on my head. Ted Kaczynski, holy cow!
Hey, did you go swimming today? Did you get to the swimming pool?
I did, Steve. Nice? Thanks for asking. I did. And it was very nice. I was on the way to the swimming pool when I realized we were supposed to be having it. Yes, I was supposed to have called you. And we did. And I did. And I got some swimming in. And that's my principal form of exercise.
Does that elevate the mood? Like, does that make you feel a lot better? Like
it does.
Endorphins
I mean, it's
stuff?
also like, it also really kind of mellows me out too. It's like I get very sort of calm from it.
What's your stroke?
Well, I mean, I just mostly do a standard sort of crawl, but I do backstroke a lot because I'm good at backstroke. I mean, as a competitive swimmer, I swam backstroke and I was not good.
Is that right?
I was good enough at the stroke that's the oddball stroke that I would swim sometimes. I was like the kind of third level guy if you needed somebody to be a backstroker. I'm built completely wrong to be a backstroker, but I'm good at it and I can do it forever. and it's like a stroke that I like. So I'll do backstroke too, but the other ones, breaststroke and butterfly and stuff like that, are too hard.
They're very hard.
I can do them, but they're too hard.
I love to swim, but I never really got the strokes together. Like I grew up swimming in a swimming pool, so I love to horse around. But if you ask me to swim laps, I feel like it's so boring. And so I never learned to do it right.
It's boring. It's also hard. It's surprisingly difficult. Yeah, I can remember being in high school and they brought the football team in once. The coach thought, I'm going to give these guys a different form of exercise and bring them in. And they were all just mocking us, the football players. They were like, what is this
they
shit,
tried
you
it.
fucking wimpy fucking swimmers? And they got in, and one length, let alone 2 lengths of the pool, they were gasping for air. These guys are hanging. Yeah, because especially guys like that, these bulky muscles and stuff, that's just terrible for swimming. So these guys were devastated by swimming for an hour. It was hilarious. And we were just like, just continuing on. And it's like, I can swim forever. I can just swim forever and not stop. And then I think I float because I'm mostly blubber, Steve. I'm 97% blubber. So that's why I can just glide through the water, Steve, like a dolphin.
Secret weapon.
My secret weapon, 97% blubber. Yep, that's me. Oh, this is hot. This is hot. We're hot. We're coming in hot with this one. Facial hair and swimming. I'm telling you. Interestingly, I used to do the whole shaving everything thing to swim. I used to shave my head.
The whole body?
I used to shave my body. We used to do the whole thing for
the nether regions as well?
I don't remember personally shaving the nether regions, but there probably are people who do that. And then sometimes you'd spread on this weird slick.
Oh, yeah, Michael Phelps.
Yeah,
he must just oil himself up
Yeah, you would put this weird stuff on. I don't know if it's legal I think it must have been. So that it actually would make you feel like you're gliding through the water faster.
Oh.
And it did make you, it might have been psychological mostly, but you did feel like, woo, fuck. I'm like a barracuda now. I'm just like cutting through the water. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, we get into some of that in this discussion today.
We do.
The sort of psychology of sport a little bit.
Nicely done. Nicely tied together once again, Professor. Very nicely done. We do indeed, with our guests, get into a very interesting conversation about sports. Not your usual conversation about sports.
No.
It's a chinwag conversation about sports.
It is.
So, yeah, but before we get to that, we have our roster of announcements, don't we, Steve?
Yes. Well, one thing we want to do is first thank the listeners. Our community is awesome, and also encourage you guys to keep it up. And we're just, send people an episode that you're enjoying, text it to them, share it with them. And
share the wealth.
Keep the letters coming, the reviews, the 5-star reviews. That stuff is really good for growing the Chinwag.
Always. Absolutely. Text them things and keep it coming to us through those podcasts, through the platforms. Absolutely. Very good. Moving on to the meat of the matter. We have a very excellent guest today. Very funny, very smart comedian and writer.
Yeah.
Whose award-winning show, ALEX EDELMAN, Just For Us, is streaming now on HBO Max. It was just on Broadway. It's terrific. It's really great.
Very clever and funny and
very
thoughtful.
Yeah. Yep, he's really, really smart cat. Yes, he completed an acclaimed run on Broadway and around the world. So stream his show now on HBO Max. It's terrific. We're thrilled he could join us on the Chinwag to talk a little bit about all kinds of things. It gets
some
into
spirituality, some
religion,
baseball,
some baseball, improvisations.
Yeah,
it's awesome. Yeah. So please welcome to the Chinwag, ALEX EDELMAN. Hello, Alex.
It looks like Alex is not at his computer.
You got a nice shot of his curtains there. It's a little creepy. It's a little David Lynch, the shot of the curtains.
That's weird.
I know. I think I can
hear him a little.
Oh, this is good.
Oh, shit. Oh my God.
Were you just doing baby shark to yourself? That's amazing. The whole thing was very sinister and strange.
That's the whole show, man.
Yeah, this is great. We came on, by the way, nice to meet you, Alex.
Nice to meet you, Alex. Welcome to Chinwag.
I'm Paul Giamatti.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, this is terrific. And this is because there was this kind of eerie shot of the curtains which was kind of spooky to begin with.
was
It
cool.
felt very sort of sinister. And then hearing you doing the baby shark thing off camera was really nice.
I was in the park. I was walking around today trying to write some new jokes. I was down on a bench and this woman was singing it to her kid and it got it stuck in my head in a way the recording never had. And so it's not even the recording, it's this woman calming her kid down. The CIA should license the song.
For sure.
Because it truly has some sort of like magic thing with people who are not verbal yet. And like, it's like Peppa Pig. Like, you ever see a kid who's screaming in a restaurant and then they slide an iPad in front of it and the kid is just like, it's like someone's tranked the kid.
Goes right to the limbic system.
Totally. I kind of think it's slipping a screen in front of any kid like shuts them up. I mean, I think it does work like that, but you're right. I mean, that's interesting, the CIA thing, you're right. And you're saying like to get somebody to break or to get somebody to like, to just play Baby Shark over and over again, to crack somebody or to like get somebody to...
Who was it, Noriega? Was it Noriega? That was
I was going to say, yes.
What were they using, like the purple dinosaur song or some shit? They would...
No, they used like Metallica, didn't they?
Yes.
Which is...
But they also used
endorsement.
the kid thing.
Oh my God, did they really?
They used Barney
they
too?
did. They did the Barney I Love You thing too.
And they did this to Noriega. Why? When he was in prison, or did they just do it to Noriega just for the hell of it? Why were they doing it to Noriega? I don't remember. Was it in Panama? Was he in prison? Does anybody remember?
He was holed up. He was holed up somewhere. When I was a kid, I volunteered at the Special Olympics, and the audience sang a song that was over and over again. I think it was an inside joke, either in the audience or the athletes. But the song was "The cat came back the very next day. We thought he was a goner, but the cat came back the very next day. We thought he was a goner." It was like for hours. This song, almost as if the audience was testing. But yeah, it was really, really something.
Amazing.
I can't believe
it. Chilling. Well, this is lovely. Thanks for joining us. This is very nice. Can I ask you where I'm always interested in this. Where are you? Where do we find you right now?
I'm at my friend's apartment on the Upper West Side.
You're in New York City.
I'm in New York City. I've got shows in Providence this weekend, but I split time pretty evenly between New York and a blue Samsonite suitcase on the road. But I'm a sort of itinerant comedian. But after the show, moved to New York and moved to Broadway. I sort of stayed. I sort of stayed here and sort of found myself back here solidly for the first time, in a while.
You mentioned that you were just walking around writing jokes. This is like such a different world for me. Is that how you do it? Like
Steve, don't you walk around thinking philosophy, Steve? Isn't that what you do?
I do, but that's a different process. So are you what is your process when you're writing a joke?
It's so funny because it's fairly non-standard, right? Like sometimes there have been years where I sit at a computer and write into the computer. There are some times where it's just, I've got like scraps of notebooks or like files on the phone or stacks of receipts, or I have a friend that I'm really in a groove with conversationally and we'll like bounce things off of each other and we'll laugh. It's very magpie-ish stand-up comedy. It's sort of like very catch as catch can. And so like I was listening to the episode you guys did with Ted Chiang. And
awesome.
And it's so funny because you said he's got like a very small but extremely like thoughtful body of work, right? Like his body of work is like
super concentrated, very concentrated stuff. Yeah.
And one of my professors in college was a short story writer named Nathan Englander, who I absolutely love. And Jim Shepard is another one of my favorite short story writers, and he writes really thoughtful, concise stuff. And I thought, God, this is so different from short story writing, because mine is just like, my whole life is just taking as much spaghetti as I can make and throwing it at a wall. Right. And they're like, God, what a brilliant thing you've done. And I'm like, no, it's just spaghetti.
A lot of spaghetti. Yeah. And that is nice. Yeah.
Sometimes I'll just improvise also. Like yesterday I was on stage at the Comedy Cellar because I'm sort of getting back out there and trying new stuff. And I said, I'm not a fan of, and then I realized I didn't have an end to the sentence. I was just talking. My brain was just talking.
Wow.
So I said, monkeys. And then I had to come with a reason I'm not a fan of monkeys. It was just like...
Right. What did you say?
I was like, you know what? God got to humans. And so to leave the rough drafts lying around does feel pretty sloppy.
Nice.
Come on. That's amazing.
Really nice.
Did you really just pull that out of nowhere?
Genuinely. Genuinely, I don't even believe it. It's not true. I love monkeys, but it's like I'm a big fan of monkeys. Zero notes. The any group of people, any group of anything where it's socially acceptable to throw feces to demonstrate anger seems like a pretty solid system. But like, yeah.
You put yourself under duress. That's what is interesting about improvisation. And I noticed like jazz players, I play jazz music, and it's almost like you have to put yourself under duress to force certain moves out of yourself that you wouldn't ordinarily do.
I don't want to believe that that's true or necessary to create things. That makes me so anxious, Steve, just hearing that.
You're a good improviser, Paul.
Too.
I'm not a good improviser. I don't think I am, actually. At least when it comes to acting, I don't feel like I am. You have to tell me what to say, and I have to get really, really familiar with what you tell me to say before I can begin to feel like I can play around with it. And because otherwise I won't feel equipped to just start improvising a character unless I've come up with it with myself, but I don't do that. So it's a weird thing. I feel...
Paul, I like what you said just a moment ago in response to that, because, you know, when I was a person in my 20s, that stress was not just manageable, but fun, right? Like going to a place and going on stage and dying. You had all the time in the world for this sort of trial and error process that was stress induced. And now that I've, just turned 35 and, I've been, my process is less iterative than it used to be, right? Like it used to be, you toiled away for years and who cared? But now with a tiny bit more notoriety, people expect a quicker output. And so like trying to figure out, Steve, in a way where it's less stressy is really I think for my life would be
you need a career of this. You don't want to be constantly under duress.
I think I worked out of anxiety for a long time, and like you say, there was a kind of pleasure to be taken in it. Well, not pleasure. It was a mechanism that felt comfortable in some way, and I got tired of it. And I think though, Steve, it's interesting you say jazz musicians and stuff, but they have enough equipment that they've learned so well to work with that they can draw on it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I think for me, if I get a new character every time, I go, I don't know how to improvise as this person yet. Because I think if I start to improvise, I'm going to be drawing. I mean, it's a whole interesting question of persona and things like that. I'm going to be drawing on me too much and not on a character. And so I feel this need to build in some information about the guy before I can start to improvise.
There is no replacement for time on stage when the audience is looking at you and you have to say something. Like it's sort of like bullet time in the Matrix. Yeah. Like you are there, you are acting completely on instinct, but your brain is part of that. Your brain is almost entirely that instinct. And so the sort of self-doubt doesn't have as much time to filter in. So you're actually doing better. And the reason I record all of my sets and I listen back to them when when I'm disciplined, because it almost puts me back in that headspace. It almost puts me back in, I get like 1/10 of that bullet time back. I go, instead of going, oh, should I be doing this? Instead, I think, oh, in that moment, what is it that I wish I had said? Yeah. And that wish can become a reality the next time out.
Right.
But so like you need that time on stage to, and you also need spaces where you can fail completely, especially as you tackle, the Comedy Cellar is really good for that. Because like I'm trying to work out some material on like, and we won't get into it. I'm trying to work out material on current events that are really spicy. And like, I can't, I can't do that in a place without everyone's phone in an envelope and me like.
Yes, it has to. But that's interesting. That certain amount of, because that is true. Because Steve, you go, oh, you're good at improvising to me. And I think, yeah, I sit here and I'm able to do it. But there's a certain amount of pressure, not bad pressure, but there's a certain amount of demand on me to perform. And so I have to sort of come up with things. So you're right. I mean, it's a different thing I'm doing here too. I don't need to be crafting a set of jokes or anything like that.
I think you have too narrow a view of improvisation. But like we do this on stage in front of people, and we are improvising, and we could just flop terribly. But it's like what you were saying, Alex. Like in jazz, you trade fours, so it basically means solo time. You get 4 measures to say something, then the next guy gets 4 measures, and if you mess it up, guess what? It's coming around to you again. Like there's no time to be precious about it. You have to just stick and move.
Paul, just in terms of acting, like if you were ever put in an environment, and I don't even know that they exist anymore, but say like say you were working with Elaine May, 35 years ago, and she was directing like Mikey and Nikki or A New Leaf or something like that. And she was, or Ishtar, and she was, which is like, by the way, like a famous disaster, but not a bad movie. Like,
no, it's not a bad movie. Yeah.
And she demanded lots of improv. And in some of the cases, it yielded like Heartbreak Kid is full of these beautiful moments that Grodin and Jeannie Berlin came up with together. Do you think that if you were thrown into sort of like an improv requested heavy environment that you could sort of pull it off?
I think I could if I knew that if it was a space where this is what we're doing and we're starting and we have a basis and there's someone there who's, all that like Cassavetes stuff and everything. When people sort of fetishize that stuff and I'm like, yeah, but they really knew what they were doing. You know what I mean? It was an approach that was really fruitful for them. They weren't just showing up and screwing around. You know what I mean? So I'd need to know, there'd need to be somebody in control that I trusted. Because otherwise I just feel like it, you know what I mean? But I do have to do it a lot, and that's what happens. It's just this kind of like, well, you guys are actors. You can just go out there and just like say some funny stuff. And I'm like, I can't really, then I just am lost. Then I'm lost. I don't, my brain doesn't work quite that way. I have a different brain chemistry or something.
I also like, by virtue of repeating something again and again and again and again, whenever a new pathway opens up in something I've said 100 times, I'm like really interested in what that means. But like,
that's interesting.
But like to say something that opens up after like 2 times is not nearly as interesting, right? Like there's not a lot of staying power in something that like you're saying differently for the second time. If you're saying it different for the 101st time, then there's definitely something there, right? Like your brain has weighed all of the options.
That's interesting.
And decided that it would like to go in this direction.
That's very interesting, because I do find that when I've done plays on stage after many, 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 many performances, that thing that suddenly opens up a moment I've done 1,000 times is really interesting and fruitful. You're right. That's really cool.
And you want it. That's the thing, right? Yeah. Like you want it. Do you ever get a great note from a director or a peer, and as they start saying the note, your brain doesn't even let them finish a sentence? You're like, you're addressing the thing that I've always known as the problem and have never been able to articulate it or never been able to admit it to myself. Like, yes. I always try to dig notes out of like visiting comedians. So like when Seinfeld came to my solo show, when Billy Crystal came and like Steve Martin, I would never let them leave without being like, give me a note.
Yeah.
And for every one of them, when they started saying it, I was like, yeah, you're right. I know you're right. I didn't want to admit it. It's like,
yeah.
Does your ego get crushed though in this process? Like, I guess it's part of the process. Like,
no, I have such an ego and I have so much external, I'm such a pig for external validation, but to be already reckoned with, like, I never had a problem in a writer's room whenever anyone shot down my joke or rewrote me for television, because I was in the writer's room. So I'm already past the membrane, and you have to assume a level of trust. So it's like the same thing. Like I have ego for lots of things, but never for like, for someone sort of like addressing my work in that way. I always feel like honored that someone would think enough of it to sort of like engage in any sort of discursive approach to it. Like it's such a hugely flattering thing that, because really, if you saw mediocre work and you were asked for advice, you'd be like, it's fine. No, it's fine. It's like, or you give.
That's terrible. That's true. And it's terrible. It's painful.
Paul, have you been in a situation where like a director gave you so many notes that you're like, Jesus, back off, or like to the ego?
Oh yeah, there's those people. No, I don't. I think I'm the same way. I think if I have that reaction of back off, it's because now you're giving me too much information. Okay, and you're starting to fill me up too much, and you're giving me too many things, and I'm not smart enough. I can only use 1 or 2 of these things right now. You're giving me too much, and then I'm overloaded.
But the really good ones never do, right, Paul? Like the really good ones just sort of like let you do your thing.
Yes. And they'll give you very little, or they'll figure out how you need to be talked to individually. So it's a real skill to kind of identify how to talk to people.
My director was my closest friend for a very long time, a guy named Adam Brace. He directed this show and did all of my work. He used to ask provocations. He would say it's a provocation more than anything else. Whenever he offered a note, he would ask a question, and from my answer would sort of Socratic method. Like he truly, truly brilliant guy, and special person. He'd be like, "Why are you doing that?" And I would tell him, and he was like, "Okay, well now let's talk about that holistically as an approach, and whether or not you. So why do you mutter that line? Is it a throwaway? And I was like, I think it's a throwaway. He's like, why are you throwing it away? And so like, it wasn't like, and by the way, sometimes people are like, all right, we'll leave it as a throw, but at least it was like thoroughly gone through. Because also he wasn't a stand-up comedian. So sometimes I'd be like, Adam, if I yell this line, it won't work. Or if I mutter this line, it won't work. And occasionally I was like, if I don't yell the line, it doesn't get a laugh. He's like, well, then is it very good? It's like, oh gosh. Well, that one actually feels pretty devastating to hear from.
Yeah.
Like, here's what I'm thinking is going to happen in the very near future, and it's probably happening already, but I'm out of this world, is I have a feeling that ChatGPT and AI is going to be used to like write jokes. And I know they're going to be bad, but if you have it write like 100 generations of a joke, then you can just pick the one that is the funny one. Like, you see what I'm driving at? Like, is this going to be the future where...
Is humor something? I haven't even seen it, like jokes written by AI. Is it?
They're bad.
They're bad. But the other thing is that I actually think, and please correct me, because I know I've heard you guys talk on this podcast, including the TED, about AI, right? Look, that director who I loved and was a brilliant guy passed away right before we started on Broadway. And sometimes people are like, yeah, it's terrible, like my most fulsome collaboration. And sometimes people are like, he's with you. And I get what they mean by that. And like my spirituality doesn't quite work that way, but like, I think what they're assuming is that I've got enough aggregate information to sort of AI a response, to type it into mentally, like what would Adam have thought, ChatGPT in my head, and then extrapolate out from that. But the truth is, the reason we had such a fulsome collaboration was he always surprised me. And so the provocations were always there. And so I think it does a great amount of disrespect to sort of his intellect. By the way, I've taken lots of good lessons from him and the high standards that he has, and like very happy he was in my life, even though he's gone. But to assume that ChatGPT, just to flip that back into ChatGPT, to assume that ChatGPT can take all of the things that it knows and then generate authentic surprise seems extremely counterintuitive to me to how AI works, right? Like I've seen lots of good jokes that have been generated by AI, but they're never surprising. They're always good. I mean, 99.999% of them are bad, but in the good ones that come out, they are sort of like B+ Onion headline logical conclusions of like things that are relatable, but they're never transcendent. And so I think like, Stephen, you're so right. Like there's a world in which ChatGPT takes comedy and like moves in another direction. Simon Rich, who's one of the most brilliant screenwriters, short story writers, comedy writers, wrote a thing about how ChatGPT is going to take all of our jobs, and he got access to a new generation of AI. But like, I do think at least for stand-up, I think it's not great for like aggregates of things from the past aren't great for generating surprises in the future. And so that's a thing that I'm like a little bit, it's the thing a little bit shaky on.
Yeah, it's a very cool point.
It's super interesting. Can I ask you about your spirituality? I mean, you'd say that, that it's not necessarily how it functions in the sense of there's in some sense, your friend is kind of present with you like a ghost or something like that. And not a ghost or whatever ghost means.
Sure.
But I'm curious to know about what your attitude towards that kind of thing is. Spirituality in general, or even how spirituality shades into like the paranormal and stuff like that.
I believe in a sort of like Mircea Eliade type spirituality, if that name like rings a bell at all. Like
Chicago.
I believe, that's right. He was a dean at the University of Chicago.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
And I believe in a sort of like, and by the way, not to like, in case you guys don't want to wind up getting into it, totally fine. But like, that's what was interesting to me about the.
No, we get into it.
The baseball thing.
Oh yeah.
Is that
baseball something I definitely want to talk about? But keep going, please.
But like, I've always liked things that were access mundi. I've always liked things that let you access things that were sort of outside your experiences, totems. You know, like, I don't know that I believe in an afterlife per se, but I also believe that I have been to places on this planet where the veil between this world and whatever is not is very thin. And I think there are places, which, by the way, not to posit, you asked about the most like paranormal leaning aspects of my spirituality. I guess the most like paranormal aspect leaning in my spirituality is that there are places in this world like forests in Japan or bridges in China or the top of the Shard in London or that weird place in Hudson Yards where like there's just a very there's like a very energy that is like that for an extremely negative, sorry way calls people away from this world. And like it is, and so that is a thing that like I'm fascinated by things that let us access meaning and let us. And by the way, in terms of like conventional things, I think I've taken lots of cues from my Orthodox Jewish upbringing in terms of like believing in a sort of spirituality that's combined with rigorousness. Like I believe that like I'm suspicious of spirituality without rigor always.
Interesting. That's very interesting.
And like go ahead, Stephen.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying here, especially like this point about places where you feel some like the membrane between the worlds is thinner there. I like this idea. But I have a question about Judaism and Orthodox, I guess, in particular, but and this is coming from a place of ignorance, although I was married to a Jewish woman for 15 years, so I have some...
you didn't learn a thing.
Pig is not kosher, Stephen.
Thank you.
All right.
Circumcision. Thank God we cleared that up. No, Jesus Christ.
My question was it's my impression that Christians are much more concerned about and worried about the afterlife than the Jewish people I know. They're like, Jewish people are like, yeah, maybe not, but we have to repair this world. So there's a kind of, there's sort of more, it seems like there's more focus on the ritual and the practice and the community than like the metaphysical idea of an afterlife. What is your sense of it?
Do you know, honestly, I think it's been different at different times in Jewish history.
Okay.
I think that Jews are actually extremely focused on the idea of like heaven and hell. And by the way, I'm happy to be correct. I'm sure you probably have the most intellectual listenership of any podcast. So I look forward to many DMs.
They'll let us know. Yeah.
But this idea that, sometimes people are like, well, I hear that Jews don't have a hell. And I'm like, of course we do. We have a Gehenna, we have a fit. And by the way, Armageddon comes from a physical location that's a very disappointing valley outside of the old city of Jerusalem. It's like
just not much.
True. Oh, it's really sad. It's like a divot. You're like, this is where the final battle is. I was like, you're gonna have to rent a function hall to give a medium-sized bar mitzvah in this valley. It's all rocky and shit.
It's very fun. I think I've been to Jerusalem and I think I saw it. Yeah, it's true.
It's a brutal valley between like East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. There's a weird telephone wire that has run through it since the first time I saw it as a kid and the last time I was there a couple years ago. And I'm like,
such a disappointment.
What is that telephone? Is that the line to Revelations or something? But so Jews are actually extremely focused. Traditionally, Judaism is extremely focused on the afterlife, especially because I think, like lots of like Yahwist religions, life was so miserable for most of its practitioners that the promise of an eternal paradise, especially for like martyrdom at the hands of the Romans, was a big part of it. The funny thing is, it's actually tikkun olam, this idea of repairing the world, that has been sort of like, which is very much a part of Judaism and very much like a very wholesome and practiced and like taught to children type of Judaism, tikkun olam, or chesed, which is the sort of set of ethics that informs tikkun olam. But like it's become a little Mr. Roger-fied, like in the sense that I have a joke that I can no longer do because I've been accomplice to so many of these, but in terms of helping write the speeches. But every person who ever goes to a Jewish function where a politician speaks to Jews, I think the first law of Jews attending political functions is that they will be treated to a speech from a politician who informs them that they are not obligated to complete the work, but nor are they free to abandon it, which is always misquoted and always miscited. And it's like, it's become a very feel-good thing that is like, if you brought up tikkun olam with like with like a Ukrainian peasant, like 200 years ago, and they were living in a shtetl, they'd be like, I mean, sure, but it's like way more important not to be threshing wheat on the Sabbath. Like, you understand that it's like that, so this idea of repairing the world, like, yes, there's a grand unifying ethos, but like, I almost took comfort in the sort of like humanist assumptions of Judaism. Like, there is an idea that like, I always thought it was sort of condescending that religion had to be like, remember not to do unto others as you would not want done unto you. You'd be like, well,
okay.
Yeah, sure. That seems to go.
I learned that
Seems
early.
intuitive. Yeah.
Kids get that. Yeah.
But there was always a more granular, like the idea of the ethics around Judaism always seemed like sort of high level laws that were up for interrogation and interpretation later on. Like, for me, again, this is strictly an interpretation for me, but I think it's a decently informed one, is that, one of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not murder, which is like an obvious one, but it's in there precisely so that, the commentaries on it, of which there are millions and millions of words, can actually dig into what murder is, which sounds silly, but that's what we do with our legal system, right? Like, there is a classification of what murder is, and you have to sort of get into it. And then there are thousands and thousands of pages of Talmudic commentary on exactly what happens when someone gets murdered, how, they parse into what is manslaughter now, considered manslaughter now. There's like, like Judaism is a very legal focused thing. And I think at its heart, frankly, is the rigorousness. Now that I'm saying
that's that rigor. Yeah, that's all the rigor you were talking about. Yeah, it's incredibly rigorous.
There's something very similar in Buddhism too, because there's like a set of texts that are for the monks, and there are all these rules. There's a million rules, and you got to do them exactly right. Then that's called the Vinaya. Then there's the sutras, which are like the stories for lay people like us. And that's all the stuff you learn about Buddhism. The Buddha said this, he did that. And then there's the Abhidharma, which is like the philosophical stuff. And I feel like in Judaism too, you have like the Torah, the Talmud, the Kabbalah. There's these, and a lot of religions have these cool like divisions of labor where like the thing you're supposed to do is quite different if you're, a family member or a philosopher or a priest or whatever.
By the way, it's one of my Judaism pet peeves is when people tell me out of nowhere that they're studying the Zohar or studying Kabbalah, because like that's being like, oh, I'm in med school, and you're like, wait, have you taken?
Yeah,
have you taken biology? Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like
I'm a surgeon.
It's like I'm going to parse the secrets of the Jewish mystics, and you're like, well, those guys all knew millions and millions of words and pages by heart, and now you're just like, I guess I'll just get into it,
and they would, then they wouldn't just hand it over to somebody. It makes no sense when I hear somebody say that. It makes absolutely no sense when I hear somebody say that.
There's a custom that you're not supposed to study the Zohar until you've either turned 40 years old, or which back then was not age, which was not no age, or been studying for 40 years. And so people who really dug into the Zohar.
No, you're not supposed to touch that stuff.
Yeah.
The Zohar is also so esoteric that like it's not really respected as a source of like Jewish thinking, because it's so like, I have almost never heard anyone in a like serious Jewish environment quote the Zohar. Like sometimes someone will quote a teaching which is beautifully illustrative, but it's got an element of like, and by the way, that is a little bit how I feel about God, or at least Jewish God, which is that like that God is so impossible. I'm sure you've had many guests who have said versions of this, but to me, God is so unfathomably difficult to figure out, that the idea that any one human can do it or do it directly feels really, which is why I prefer a more Eliada type model, where like you glimpse meaning or something in it, like in your peripheral and like in a mirror somewhere, like you catch meaning by throwing spaghetti at the wall, which is like, which feels like the most authentic way to it. So I love this sort of like Eliada stuff. I sort of like love the like Homo ludens type stuff. Huizinga?
Oh, yeah.
Huizinga?
Yeah. Oh, great. That's like man as the playful animal. Yeah. Awesome.
Man, the playful creature is what it means. Yeah.
Like odium, like the idea that we balance this rigorousness in this play and end up coming out with meaning feels right to me. Can I quickly plug my special, by the way?
Please.
Can I tell you about my special? Because I'm aware that my phone's over there, but I'm sure my publicist is like, but do you want to mention the thing you're currently selling?
Please do.
I have this special that was a solo show on Broadway called Just for Us, and it's rough. I went to this meeting of like white nationalists in Queens and sat there for an hour, and eventually one of them was like, "Sorry, but this guy's Jew," so like that's the sort of central narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I worked on it for like 6 years, and it just came out in HBO, and I
congratulations,
so
man.
Proud of it.
Yeah,
happy
it's great.
with it.
Yeah.
Oh, please.
Yeah,
and like
so you should be. Yeah, it's awesome.
Please, but this has been the most fun.
It's a ballsy thing that you did. It's very impressive.
Ballsy thing, yeah. And it makes a great show. So yeah, it's great.
I thank you so much for having me. This is the most fun.
Oh, it was such a pleasure. Whew, that was
wow. That was a true chinwag.
It really was exemplary chinwag, kind of. Right?
He's a great improviser too, just in terms of conversation. Like he can take it in all kinds of directions. It was awesome.
Super smart guy, super interesting guy. It was so chock full of chuckles and wisdom. Our conversation with Alex Edelman. Yes, it was.
Chock full is something that really I don't hear that often anymore, but it's such a great phrase. Really? It was chock full. I know, it really was.
Chock full, and I really don't know what it means. We gotta look into the etymology of chock full. I don't really know exactly what it means.
We gotta figure that out. Full though.
It was chock full, and so much so that we couldn't fit it all into this one chinwag. So next week, we'll bring him some religion,
baseball,
some of the religion of baseball, sports, but sports as a kind of bigger philosophical thing. More of that.
Yeah,
thank you for listening. Excellent. Yes, indeed. I think, Steve, aren't we in a couple of days going to have a little mailbag?
It's time to dig into the mailbag, my man, which you seem to carry around I sort of picture you with a giant bag over your shoulder reaching in, and that's coming up, people. Stay tuned for that.
We're going to dip into the mailbag. So until then, wag on?
Yes, I do believe wag on. Chinwag is a production of Treefort Media and Touchy Feely Films. Hosted and executive produced by Paul Giamatti and Stephen Asma. Executive producers for Treefort are Kelly Garner and Lisa Ammerman. Dan Carey is executive producer for Touchy Feely. Our series producer is Rachel Whitley Bernstein. Original theme music by Luke Topp, with additional music by Via Mardot. Oscar Guido is our executive in charge of production. Tom Monahan is head of audio for Treefort. Audio production supervision by Matt Dyson. Editing and mixing by Jeff Neal. Animation created by Alex Sokol. Research assistance by Aidan Brooks. Lastly, for more information, go to chinwagpod.fm and find us on Instagram or TikTok at chinwagpod or on Twitter at chinwag_pod.